Every great creative work stands on the shoulders of giants. Welcome to RetroInspection, where we examine and find out where the things we love today came from.
So, today we're talking about The Gladiator, written by Philip Wylie. Nick, I was kind of floored by this guy. He is an enormously influential author. So influential that he was at one time imprisoned by the U.S. government at the close of World War II, right before the atomic bombs had been, right before the Alamogordo tests, because he had predicted the use of uranium bombs some months or maybe a year prior.
Not alone in that.
So this guy was quite a genius, I think, is the best word for it. He was born in 1902, the son of a Presbyterian minister and a novelist. His mother was a novelist. He went to Princeton, so that's probably where I'm unclear. Wikipedia is unclear as to what his credentials were, but it sounds like because he later became the head of a marine biology lab that he was a biologist. Not quite sure, but as we get into Gladiator, we'll talk about why that might be. But he was at Princeton when Albert Einstein was there, so that's probably where he got his knowledge of physics, and he was quite an engineer, I guess, as well. Later in life, he became one of the people who was influential in founding the civil defense against atomic warfare in this country, in the United States. In terms of his literature, I'm quite ashamed that I don't know enough about this man in terms of his literature, because he influenced so many people. He was a novelist. He was a writer in Hollywood as well. He wrote some of his famous works were When Worlds Collide, that he wrote with another gentleman, Edwin, I have it written down here.
Balmer.
Edwin Balmer, that's correct. That
yeah,
became quite a successful sci-fi movie in the 50s, but has been widely credited as influencing the creation of Flash Gordon, of the Flash Gordon serials in the 1930s, newspaper serials. But we land here with Gladiator, which, although there isn't a direct through line to his work Gladiator and that of Superman, when reading this book, it's highly plausible that Jerry Siegel and Joel Shuster used this as one of their bases for creating the Man of Steel. Nick, you want to talk about Gladiator?
Far from alone in that.
Right, of course.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at Gladiator, you can see pieces of it. Not only in other pulp heroes such as Doc Savage.
Well, that was another superhero, pulp hero that I was unaware that he influenced. In fact, his work was Savage something that then became Doc Savage. Who was the writer of Doc Savage?
Oh, geez, and it just fell out of my head. Hold on, let me look at it real quick. Why I have this thing up? Oh shit! Like this is gonna happen.
It's an L, I think.
Lester Dent.
Lester Dent. That's right.
Yeah,
while he is associated with the pulps, his work never really reached that wide of an audience, I don't believe. Although it was critically praised in his time, it was not. It didn't rise to the level of pulps, but it did earn him some interest in Hollywood, obviously. Um, but back to Gladiator. Now, when we talk about Superman and its influences, we have to talk about Nietzsche and all of these other influences as well. But Gladiator specifically, because it began as a narrative, it wasn't just a philosophy. It began as a narrative where a young, uh, where a young duo writing together probably would pass this book around um, because it had garnered some fame. But
I think Siegel and Schuster were part of like a science fiction fan
right,
club in their high school in Cleveland. Yeah,
so they would have
they're getting all of it.
they would have read this.
Sure, yeah.
It would maybe maybe it would have skipped their purview, but doubtful. But let's talk about Gladiator, because it's one thing to say it influences Superman, but what is it?
So basically, a college biology teacher, I believe in Indiana, comes up with this thing where he can give animals super strength by means of alkaline free radicals, which is like the purest 1920s, 30s pulp hokum. So he's just basically a magic shot. He gives it to a cat initially. The cat, develops super strength, runs amok, in the countryside, kills cows at night. He eventually has to poison the cat, lest it become an even more destructive force. But then he pulls the same thing with his pregnant wife. He gets her drunk. And, like the first trimester of her pregnancy. Yeah.
Let me stop you right there, because what would possess someone after having created this monstrous cat to have experimented on their pregnant wife? I mean, is that a dedication to science?
It's a Dr. Frankenstein thing, where he's gonna prove his theories. They all laughed at him. They said he was mad. And in actuality, in the novel, that's one of the things he tries to explain this shit to like other scientists who work at his college, and they're all like, you and your alkaline free radicals. What are you trying to put off on us? So yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you would think he would have better access to an anesthetic than alcohol, but yeah, he gets the old lady loaded on blackberry wine in the first trimester of her pregnancy, which we now know 100 years later is not the hottest idea. But then yeah, he shoots her full. It doesn't exactly say where, I think, but he shoots her full of the super serum, for lack of a better word, and out comes the kid. And from that point on, you can see the things where Siegel and Schuster, in the original short origin story for Superman, one of the things is a year-old baby with like a chest of drawers balanced over its head. In the original comics, the Kents get to adopt, the baby because the orphanage wants to get rid of the baby because the orphanage is scared because the kid is wrecking up the place. And this is essentially what happens in Gladiator. They again, like the Kents, they train the kid to hide his abilities, to be very careful, and they have to warn him that he could hurt people. So and he mustn't display his strength, or people will be scared of him. And this is all as you read down the Superman story. These are all the high points of the Kents raising, Clark, Kal-El. So you can definitely see where if Siegel and Schuster didn't lift something, guys later on, 100%, lifted from this as they develop Superman's youthful backstory. But this is also the same kind of shit as most of the heroes, well, not most, I'm sorry, but as many heroes in the 1940s. Jules Pfeiffer called this out, back in the 60s, that there were like guys who got their superpowers from some external source, such as like, they were magic guys, they were from another planet, they got, radiation or chemicals or something spilled on them. But then there were superheroes like Captain America, like the Shield, who were created intentionally, if not by the government, by some other science. These are now, I think, sometimes known as science heroes, where, some guy gives Steve Rogers a shot. Okay, now he's Captain America. So that's like somebody else swiping Gladiator.
Well, so let's talk about what happens in Hugo's life, because we've maybe touched on some of the philosophy and how it was related to eugenics and what have you. But tonally, I was quite surprised at this work, because as advertised, this is something that, or at least in hindsight, as advertised, this is something that inspired Superman. Superman that we see today, for the most part, with the exception really being Zack Snyder's Man of Steel and the movies that he did for Warner Brothers. The Superman that we see is this kind of angelic figure who, saves cats out of trees, etc. And that's fine. It's wonderful in its own way. But this book, there's more of a clear line through it. Well, let me take that back, because the very early works of Siegel and Schuster with the Superman character, Superman was not that guy who saved cats out of trees. He might have, but
no.
He was more in line with, I see injustice and I'm going to take care of it. And if that means cracking heads, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And Hugo Danner is very much the same way, because he's this guy with these extraordinary abilities. He wants to do something for humanity. He ends up having several tragic turns in his life, but finds a cause in World War I where he essentially could have defeated the entire German army on his own. And I don't recall this being in the book, but in my imagination, born from reading the book, I could see Hugo caked in blood and human flesh after running through the trenches that were occupied by the Germans.
He spends his war years, at least like 2 or 3 years of the war, just killing Germans en masse. He kills hundreds, if not thousands, of Germans during the course of World War I. Armistice is declared on the day that he finally makes up his mind that he's just going to march. He's going to kill people till he gets to Berlin, and then he's going to kill the Kaiser. And he's going to end the war single-handedly after a few years. A little slow on the uptake. It took him a while to get there. But yeah, and then of course that's the day they declare the armistice.
So this is a Superman who is not constrained like we know today.
No.
Who would have done practically anything against another human being if he felt it was necessary.
And Big S Superman was drawn along the same lines early on. The 38, 39, 40 Superman is is a whole other kettle of fish. Big S Superman. So he scares people into confessions by threatening to drop them from great heights, or by like shaking them violently. He does actually end a European war by he runs, of course, because big as Superman can't fly initially. So he actually like runs across the Atlantic Ocean, runs across Europe, and grabs a Hitler stand-in, a Stalin stand-in, and drags them for tryout to the League of Nations. Which, good luck with that. But so he ends a European war. He gets people off of death row who've been falsely accused. When there's a rash of traffic accidents because of poorly designed cars in Metropolis, he simply destroys all the cars. When slum housing needs to be built, but they don't want to do it because people are already living in shitty tenements, Superman just knocks down the tenements in order to force the government to build new low income housing. Yeah, so Hugo is not the is not the direct action socialist activist that Superman is in his early days. But yeah, Hugo definitely when he decides to do something, he doesn't really admit to having a hell of a lot of limits, because Hugo is also effectively bulletproof. He's not quite concussion proof, but that's one of the things. The Germans try to machine gun him, and they don't bounce off him, but they don't penetrate particularly far. I mean, early days Superman's power set is essentially Hugo's power set, with the jumping enormous distances and being able to lift tanks and that kind of
stuff. With no real through line to Siegel and Schuster's work, what do you think? Is Hugo Danner Clark Kent?
Oh yeah. And that's hardly, I don't know that there's much controversy about that. Certainly I don't think an original notion. Like I said, at this point, if you look at the first year or two of Superman comics, he's doing all the stuff Hugo does except kill people, and he's wearing a funny suit while he does it. But other than that, it's in terms of the power set, almost identical. He doesn't. I can't remember when Superman gets X-ray vision. I want to say that's one of the things that shows up either on or concurrent with the radio show. Because Superman can't fly until the radio show. Kryptonite doesn't show up until the radio show. But the radio show starts, I believe, in 1940. So there's only like 2 years of underpowered big ass Superman out there. Grant Morrison tried to bring that back with the advent of the New 52 comic universe for a while, and then that just kind of petered out. He was doing young Superman stories. Roy Thomas also had a series in the late 80s called Young All-Stars. It was a post-crisis series. So he couldn't use Golden Age Batman, couldn't use Golden Age Wonder Woman, Golden Age Superman. He created other versions of them other versions under other names and put them into a super team. But there was a Danner early Superman analog called Iron Monroe in that Young All-Stars.
Yes. He was Hugo Danner's son. Is that right?
Oh, was he?
I think so.
I never really read that.
Because Roy Thomas wrote for Marvel in the 70s, I believe, a Gladiator comic. So Marvel actually took this idea, I bought it or I don't know, but took it and had a comic based on him, and was written by Roy Thomas. And then Roy Thomas, during his DC work, created a Hugo Danner son. Iron, what did you say his name was? Iron something?
Iron Monroe, but I'm looking at...
I may be
Oh, yep, he was. No, you're not. He was. That is canonical.
And then Marvel,
and I did not know that. I never really read that book. So
Marvel, Chris Claremont during his X-Men days created another character directly called the Gladiator, which is acknowledged to be based on this work. Who is Shi'ar or something? I'm not entirely familiar, but he's this overpowered Superman analog of the many that are in both Marvel and DC and elsewhere. you just can't get away from it at this point.
Well, because this Gladiator that we're talking about went public domain, pretty early, I think.
Right.
Yes, the Iron Monroe. Oh, actually, it looks like Howard Chaykin actually did an adaptation of this too, for Wildstorm.
Well, in terms of the book itself, do you recommend people read it?
Oh yeah, and not simply for insight into its later influences. It's good enough to read on its own for its own merits. I would suggest that you can get it. You can get it for free places. Otherwise, you can pull it down off the Kindle. It's 99 cents.
It is a very good book, Nick.
Yeah. No, I like it a lot.
It's well written, but I too I thought the ending was abrupt. It's really is one of those books where you think, boy, there was a lot more story here, and it could have been told, but for whatever reason, Wylie decided that he didn't want to tell it.
His brain may not have gone to series character. Again, 1930. Not everybody's. I mean, it's not everybody, because certainly some people were obviously in the 30s, but not everybody's thinking franchise. Some people were content merely to write one book on a particular subject or a particular character and be done with it. Whereas now, that's all we think. When you want to leave it open-ended, you're like, shit, what do people like this? I can get more of their money by doing more stuff about this character. So that was, it was left to other people. Hey, like I didn't write a series character. I'm not throwing stones on this, but it happens.
Well, I want to end here with saying that Wylie is an underappreciated author.
Like, subscribe, repost, share everywhere. To see what else we're up to, visit xynobooks.com, xenobooks.com.